Listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday, the 11th of July, 2026. This is Teachers Talk Radio. We are currently sitting down to breakfast on Saturday morning, and so this is, coincidentally enough, the Saturday Breakfast Show, and I am your host, Darren Lester. Good morning. How are we doing? How has your 3 weeks been? I should know by now, whenever I take a week off, it inadvertently becomes a little bit more than the 1 week that I plan. So our last show was, it was about 3 weeks ago, and we talked about, he says, flicking back through his notes. Oh, we were talking about observation. That's right. When we were talking about kind of how much observation was too much. And then I very confidently told you that I would be off for a week and then I would come back again. And it turned out I was off for 3 weeks. But that's all right. That's all right. I am sure that you managed to enjoy your Saturday morning breakfasts just as well, even though I wasn't with you. But yeah, how was your last 3 weeks? How have your last 3 weeks been? I hope they have been good. I hope they have been successful. We had that nice kind of weather slump in the middle there where it kind of cooled down quite considerably. And now we are back to the heat wave, at least here in the southwest of England. We've got that heat coming back to us. I don't know about you though, but I personally haven't noticed it as much this time as I did during the last stint. And I don't know whether that's because it kind of, I got used to it. I guess like under the last heat wave, it was a bit of a shock. Didn't really know that it was coming. I didn't expect it to come. And then all of a sudden it was here. Then it cooled down and now we've gone back up again, but I don't think we've quite met the temperatures that we had before. And so, I can't say that I've really noticed it thus far. Of course, this could be me showing my naivete, and you might be sitting there thinking, but Darren, the heat wave hasn't actually started yet. It's still coming. It's just been, a regular summer over the last 3 days. I don't know. But I've got my fan. My trusty fan has been broken back out of storage. I shouldn't have put it away, really. I guess that was wishful thinking. But I pulled it back out of storage, ready for the weekend and ready for the rest of the week. And I hope that you all do the same. I know sometimes I might come across as a bit dad-like with my concern about everybody's health. And you are all adults, you are all grown-ups, you can take care of yourselves. But I will just remind you to keep yourselves hydrated, please. Keep yourselves covered up with sunscreen as much as anything else. I say this because, and I don't know if I've talked about this on the show before. I may have done, but I'm not sure. But I did a few years ago have a bout of skin cancer. It it was ironic because if you have been listening to the show for any amount of time in the past, you will know that I am not a sun lover at all. So I do appreciate the irony that I, somebody who kind of avoids the sun as much as possible and sits inside as much as possible, suffered with the skin cancer. But ever since then, I have been very, very much aware of it and very much aware of what we should do to keep ourselves protected. Now, luckily for me, we caught it so incredibly early that I could just have the kind of malignant patch removed, kind of like they would have done just for a biopsy. And that was enough to get rid of the whole thing, which surprised everybody. Even the doctors. We were expecting to, have to have another surgery afterwards. but the doctor said, "Oh no, we managed during that initial phase, the kind of shaving of it off to get everything." So I'm very, very grateful for that. But it has made me very aware of the sun, of other people's skin as well. So, do keep yourselves covered up. Do wear the sunscreen, do wear a hat, do wear your sunglasses, all that stuff that we tell the kids all of the time. Please make sure that you are doing it for yourselves as well. Because I always think, if I, as an avid sun avoider, can have a mole go wrong, then pretty much anybody can. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure that you are keeping yourselves hydrated. Um, Remember not to wait until you get thirsty, because the thirst trigger tells us that it is already too late and that our body has already gone into that dehydrated mode. So just keep yourself drinking all of the time. Um, and yeah, have fun while you are kind of keeping yourself safe. That's what I'm going to say. That is what I'm going to say. So yeah, um, what else has been going on over the last couple of weeks? Not a lot, really. Well, he says a couple of talks have been happening. Some CPD has been going on. All of those fun kind of end of year type things, which I've been enjoying. It's a bit of a funny one because as I teach in an online school and we don't have the set holidays, my students kind of request lessons whenever they want a lesson. They submit work whenever they want to submit work. We run a year-round school, and I take a holiday like I would with a normal job. So I just let my students know that I'm away, and we kind of prepare lessons and marking and stuff around that. So we don't have like the big end of year celebrations. We don't have the sending off of my examined cohorts, all of that sort of thing, because the work continues. And so it is odd. This is now my second year of kind of full time, the end of my second year full time, working online, and it is still very strange not to have that very distinct end of year marker that we have in the brick and mortar schools. But it's also quite nice, um, because I quite like that sense of continuity, the kind of constant cycle in brick and mortar schools of the academic year coming round. We are always working towards that ending, that terminus, and it always feels like it's an ending. It always feels like it's a terminus, but then for us, it starts again. I do think sometimes that can be a bit mentally draining, because you are gearing yourself up for an ending that never really comes, until it's your own time to move on. And so, yeah, I think reflecting on kind of beginnings and endings and cycles, as we quite often do during this school year, I think it probably is a good mental exercise just to remember that it's the end of a school year and the beginning of the summer holidays, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an ending or a beginning. And if you kind of need to reframe how you see the school year to take down that kind of constant hamster wheel of beginnings and endings, then do it, because whatever you need to do to get yourself through is what you should be doing. It kind of reminds me of a quote that I read earlier this week by Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher. He said, "The people who approach life like a child, playing a game and moving and pushing pieces, those are the people who possess the power of kings." And that resonated with me this week, I think, because it reminded me of the need to be curious, the need to be flexible, the need for thoughtful action instead of being constantly attached to outcomes, constantly attached to exam results, to inspection results, whatever it might be. And we are in a profession of constant change. We are in a profession of those beginnings and endings of new classes coming in, of old classes going out, of children leaving us, and potentially we never see them again. We don't know what happens to them. We don't know what they go on to be. And so it's quite good to keep Heraclitus's words in mind, to help us deal with that change, to deal with those cycles, because the underlying principle of it, and the underlying of a lot of Heraclitus's philosophy, was that we can understand life better if we accept that change, if we accept that we go through these cycles, we go through these seasons. And if we can recognize those connections between what kind of feels like opposing forces, between the different things that impact our lives, and if we can approach them like children do, like it's a game, and just have fun with it, then we are better prepared to kind of face those changes head on, to face those forces that are out of our control, but that very much shape the world that we live in.
In education, we all want recruitment to be fair and inclusive, because the gender pay gap won't disappear without clear, practical steps in how we hire. Recent national research shows schools are already taking meaningful action. 40% of leaders now include pay or progression details in adverts. 35% highlight well-being support, and around 1 in 5 are using anonymised shortlisting to reduce bias. Teaching vacancies, the Department for Education's free official job listing service, makes these steps easier, with clear salary fields, flexible working filters, and an application format that supports blind recruitment. It also removes previous salary questions, so candidates are assessed on their skills and experience rather than their past pay. For your next hire or your next role, go online and search Teaching Vacancies Gov UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
TES Magazine features a conversation with the Attorney General about citizenship, rule of law and social media. He says schools have difficult decisions to make about whether or not they want to remain on social media platforms such as X. Mr. Hermer also said that the current teaching on rule of law is mixed, as he launched free rule of law lesson plans for every school in England and Wales. The lesson plans have been developed with Oak National Academy and the Association for Citizenship Teachers, and aim to teach young people about their rights and the legal system. Citizenship is set to become statutory for primaries following the curriculum and assessment review. More details can be found online. Schools Week says plans for written coursework will face far more scrutiny under reformed qualifications to prevent AI-fueled subversion of assessment, Ofqual Chief Ian Buckham has said. Speaking at the Festival Education and ahead of the launch of 3 V-level qualifications next year, he said, "We cannot normalise the idea that AI-generated output is a substitute for human endeavour." He also said that for the qualifications to be worth more than the paper they're written on, careful design was needed. He also cautioned against the wider use of tech in the classroom, arguing it prompts less learning, less satisfaction, less usefulness in the workplace. Mr. Borkham did, however, acknowledge the enormous potential of AI in assessment and marking. More details can be found on Schools Week. The BBC covers the story of a new but unused school which is due to be demolished because of structural issues. Matford Brook Academy in Exeter was built in 2021 and opened in 2023, but has never been used by pupils. A spokesperson for the Department for Education said an independent review found fundamental issues, including problems with its foundations, meaning it did not meet standards. The decision would mean pupils will continue to have lessons in temporary buildings until 2028. The decision to demolish and rebuild was said to be the most practical way forward. A spokesperson for the school said while it was not the news the community had hoped for, it did provide a clear way forward, and they would continue to work with DFE and keep families informed as plans developed. Finally, BBC and Family Education website features a long read on mass school closures in rural parts of Kenya. A shake-up of Kenya's education system in 2017 saw the introduction of a competency-based education with a less exam-orientated, more creative and practical approach to teaching. But the article says it has had a devastating effect on rural junior schools, as 2,000 across Kenya now face possible closure as enrolment numbers plummet. Pupils are transferring to schools better equipped to deliver the new curriculum, even if it means pupils have to walk for over 1 hour to get there. Teachers have also said that the training for the new curriculum has been inconsistent, which has made implementation difficult too. The full story can be found online. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. I applaud the idea that we are looking at making assessment more robust, that we are making sure that assessment isn't undermined by the use of AI. And, I spoke a few weeks ago on this topic on the show when we talked about whether deliberate task design in assessment can help to mitigate and reduce the amount of teaching. And so I love that we are speaking out about this on a wider scale, on a more formal scale than me as one teacher getting his point of view across. But at the same time, I don't think that we can say to students, no, you can't use AI in your assessment because it takes away the human element, it isn't assessing what you know, all of that good stuff. And in the same breath say, but I'm going to use AI to mark your work. That's not fair. That's not equitable. It undermines the message that AI isn't good enough to produce something, because if it's not good enough to produce an essay, which I don't believe it is, why is it good enough to produce marking? Why is it good enough to produce feedback? It also suggests to students that either our time is more valuable than theirs, and so they can spend the time doing the work, producing the essays, all that good stuff, but we shouldn't spend the time marking it, or that we don't care about the work that they produce because we don't actually read it. We just feed it into the machine and have the machine read, in inverted commas, and mark it instead. So I think if we are going the way of telling students, no, you cannot use AI in your assessment, which I think is the right direction, we as a profession should also be saying, and so we're not going to use AI to mark your assessments. Because we don't want to be hypocrites. We don't want to undermine, to downgrade the education system by by saying and not doing. There we go. That's the way around it is. But that's just, that's just my 2 penneth worth. But I think it is an interesting conversation that we're having. And, anybody who's listened to the show for more than 2 minutes in the past will know that I am staunchly anti-AI in pretty much all walks of life. I think there are exceptions in medicine, where it can be used to track bodily changes, to look for patterns maybe that human doctors genuinely don't have the time to spot. But I think in terms of teaching, and certainly in terms of creative arts, I believe there is no place for it. Good morning to you, Tom. I hope that you are well today. I hope that you are having a great start to your weekend. Now that we have heard the news. Now that I've done my little bit of checking in, making sure that we are all okay, we can get to the meat and potatoes of today's show, which is Violence and Bullying in Schools, a View from Germany. This is a show that I have planned, or that I've been trying to do at least, for weeks, and I'm so glad that we are finally getting to it. So this is what we are talking about today. We are looking at this conversation that is global, that we tend to be having a lot in the UK. You know, there are so many UK conversations about this, but it's not just a UK issue, it's a worldwide issue. And we're going to think about an alternative country's perspective, at least, you know, for me as an English born teacher teaching in England, to see what we can learn from it. If you have anything to say on the topic today, if you want to respond to anything that that I bring up, then there are a couple of ways that you can do that. You can, just as Tom has done, you can leave a message either in the stream chat on either of the platforms that you might be listening to us to me on. And I can pop you up on the screen. I will read out the message for those of you who are listening back on playback, and we can have our conversation. You can have your say that way. If you are listening rather than watching, or if you are listening on playback, then you can get in touch with me via Blue Sky. I am at Mr. D Lester. That's MRDLESTER, all one word over there. I will read your message and we can engage in conversation that way. And as I say, and I say this every single show, if you are listening on playback and you still want to engage and you still want to have this conversation, it doesn't matter if it is no longer the 11th of July 2026. If you are listening to me and it is suddenly the 14th of October 2030, then God willing, I'm still here, you can still get in touch with me over on Blue Sky and we can still have this conversation, because as we discovered on my show about Samuel Pepys a few months ago, very few things in education actually change. Very few things in British education have changed in the past like 500 years. And so I imagine we will still be having these conversations. I will still be interested in them because I only ever do shows on topics that interest me. I basically use the show as an excuse to look at the research for things that I want to talk about, that I find interesting. And so I will still want to engage with you on that topic. So yeah, do get in touch. Do let me know. Like I said, this is not a new topic. This is not uncovered ground. In fact, back in it was in April, the 4th of April, in fact, we had a Points of View show that tackled this idea of violence and bullying in British schools. And so again, if you are watching me, the QR code that I've just popped up on the screen will take you over to that show if you want to think about it in a British context rather than a German one, which is what we're going to explore today. So scan that QR code, hit pause, so that you can continue listening to my show. You can finish off this show. Then at 10:30, you can go over and listen to that one back from the archives. Because, you know, it's always good to get multiple perspectives on all of these different topics. I'm going to leave that QR code up there for a couple of minutes, just to give you time to scan it. And yeah, we will get down to business. So my starting point today was a really interesting book that I read a few months ago by Wilfried Schubert. It's from 2020 and it's called Gewalt und Mobbing an Schulen, Möglichkeiten der Prävention und Intervention. When people ask me, Darren, how do you keep up with your languages? I will quite often say that it's a very delicate juggling act of finding things to watch, finding things to listen to, finding things to write about, and finding things to read about. Basically, the 4 language skills, finding different things to do with them in all 9 of my languages. English, of course, is easy because I'm living in England. I'm surrounded by English. I use English all the time. The others, not so much. And so, one of the things that I've started doing a lot more is reading about pedagogy um, in my other languages because pedagogy is really interesting. There is some interesting vocabulary that comes up, and it's quite reassuring for me to see that a lot of the issues that we are having in British schools are not just British issues, but they are worldwide issues. So, yeah, a few months ago when I was kind of cycling through my reading, it was German's turn. And I found this really interesting book from 2020 looking at violence and bullying in schools. And that's kind of what I used as a starting point specifically for this show. So, over the next hour or so, we're going to have a think about what the German research says about violence and bullying in schools, why the trends have shifted in recent years, the things that teachers often struggle with, what actually works in violence and bullying prevention, and how our schools can help to build cultures where students feel safe. So that's what we are going to look at. I really hope that that you join in with the conversation, that you let me know what you're thinking, what your opinions are, and we can spend the next hour having a really good chat about why this is such a big issue and what we can do about it. So let's start by thinking, why is this topic important? Why do we need to keep talking about this? Why were we having a points of view show about this topic back in April? Why was this book talking about this topic in 2020, 6 years ago? And the thing is, violence and bullying in schools, it's not new. This isn't something that has just suddenly sprung up post-pandemic. As much as we might think of it in those terms, as much as the conversation has taken this turn post-pandemic, it's not a brand new issue. In fact, as the book puts it, Gewalt und Mobbing sind bekanntlich Dauerbrennen in der öffentlichen Debatte. Violence and bullying are, as we know, perennial issues, one of my favorite phrases, in public debate. And nothing has changed. This was a perennial issue back in 2020 when the book was written. It's a perennial issue now. But there has been a shift. And the book distinguishes between what people think is happening, what we feel is happening in schools, not just us as teachers, but the wider population, the media portrayals, the parental views, and what the data actually show us. And according to the book, the data actually presents a more worrying picture than the media, than the parental comments, than the outside world, if you like, that the people who are not in schools tend to think. And the reason for this is we were actually winning. So we had noticed a marked decline in the amount of reported violence and bullying in schools from around the time that I left school in like 2001, 2002, through to 2015, 2016. Makes me wonder whether I was like repeatedly reporting bullying and violence in school. I mean, I was very lucky in that I didn't encounter violence particularly. I can think of a couple of incidences that could be considered violence, but at no point was I physically harmed. But I was very badly bullied when I was at school. So yeah, maybe I was over-reporting, and that's why we've got that shift. But the book says, nach Jahren einer rückläufigen Entwicklung seit 2015, 2016 offenbar eine Trendwende, I can't read my writing, eingetreten ist. So after years of declining levels of violence since 2015, 2016, there has been an apparent trend reversal. So basically what the book has said is that we had this decline in the levels of violence in school. The academic year 2015, 2016 came along, and all of a sudden we are getting an increase in our reports of violence, our reports of bullying. Now, again, this doesn't actually mean that levels of violence and bullying had decreased in that time. And I think it is important for us to remember this when we are thinking about this shift. Just that the reporting of it was in decline. We can hope, I hope, that it does mean that there was a time where students were less likely to harass their peers, where there was less bullying, where there was less violence. But that's actually not what the data say. That's not a conclusion that we can make. We can only safely say that the reporting had decreased. What is quite scary, though, in the book is when it says, das gilt insbesondere auch für Grundschulen. This applies particularly to primary schools. When we hear that violence is rising in secondary schools, we tend to nod along and we go, yeah, okay, of course, teens will be teens. It's not particularly shocking. And it should be, let's be honest, it should be. But we tend to just take that as a pinch of salt. If I were to ask, where do we think most violence and bullying occur? I imagine most people would say in secondary school. But the book tells us that, at least in a German context, we see this massive rise happening in primary schools more than secondary schools. And that is a concern because, and I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing it, but to a certain extent, you can understand why these things happen in adolescence. Adolescence is a difficult time. Children are changing, their hormones are out of control, their social structures are changing. They want to be treated like adults, but are still being treated like children. There's all sorts going on with them. And if they don't know how to properly regulate themselves, if they don't know how to control their own feelings and their own behaviors, then it's very easy for that feeling of lack of control to erupt. Our primary aged children don't have that same internal turbulence. And again, I'm not saying that life is easy for primary school children. Particularly, we do know that puberty is setting in earlier and earlier, and there are all sorts of reasons why that might be. We do know that lots of children have very difficult home lives, and it might be that they are coming into school and that's a place that they feel safe. And it tends to be when you feel safest that you are more likely to have an outburst because you are less concerned about what the consequences of that will be because you are feeling safe. But it is more surprising, I think, to hear about these rises in violence, in bullying happening in primary school compared to in secondary contexts. And we need to think about why this shift is happening. And the book itself suggests a combination of societal and school-based developments that are triggering this. Because if we think about the last decade, because that's what's really interesting, is that 2015, 2016 school year is more or less a decade ago. We've had that rise of smartphones, and I'm not somebody who blames all of society's ills on phones, because I think that's reductive. But we have had that rise in smartphones, and we have had children having access to phones earlier and earlier. So I was a relatively late adopter to a mobile phone. I guess I was kind of in that first generation of teenagers that kind of got phones, and I got one when I was 16. Yeah, 16, because it was the time that I was going from year 11 at my Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 comprehensive through to my sixth form college, and I got my phone that Christmas. because it meant like if I got stranded, if I missed the bus, whatever, I could phone somebody to come and get me. But of course, they were dumb phones to not coin a phrase, but to probably use that phrase for the first time in my life, where texting somebody was the height of the technology. And my students never believe me when I tell them this, but it used to cost us 10p per message. And so you were very, very careful about the messages that you sent, about the length of the messages that you sent. And a lot of what is currently considered to be internet slang, internet speech, actually came about because of that character limit, because we didn't want to spend an extra 10p where our message went 5 characters. I don't remember what the character limit was, but where our message went 5 characters over the limit. So we started just typing a U instead of writing YOU, because that decreased the chances of having to spend money that we didn't have. And, so I wasn't an 11-year-old who was giving a mobile phone because he was walking to secondary school on his own for the first time. I wasn't a 3-year-old who was given dad's mobile phone to keep me entertained while I was in the pushchair going around the supermarket. But that is happening more and more now. And again, while I don't want to demonize phones and I don't want to blame phones for all of the issues that we are having in society, because like I said, I think that's too easy. I think that's too convenient. And I think it takes away a lot of accountability of other structural issues that we have. It is important to recognize that that's one of the biggest shifts that has happened, certainly in the last 20 years. And then with the rise of smartphones over the last 10, 15 years, they've become increasingly commonplace. The number of restaurants and bars and things that I've walked into recently where you've had to scan a QR code to get the menu instead of being given a menu. And until recently, that was a problem for me because I am cheap. I have got like the cheapest phone contract that I can find because I personally don't want to pay a lot of money for my phone. And so I'm on a very limited data plan. And I didn't want to spend more than my data plan scanning a QR code so that I could get a menu. Thank you very much. Well, that really underlines my elder millennial status, doesn't it? I do apologize. But yeah, that's been a big change. Social media becoming the main area for peer interaction has also been a big change over the past 10 years. Now, again, when I was not in school, but certainly by the time I hit sixth form, social media were becoming a thing. I had a MySpace back in the day. I eventually adopted Facebook, didn't like Facebook for the longest time, couldn't understand the point of it. But I did get one eventually. I grew up in the era where you were supposed to be anonymous online because the idea of giving out your actual name and where you actually lived to complete strangers was quite scary, and it went against all the stranger danger stuff that we that we were taught in school. And these days, it's the other way around, and you are viewed as being suspicious if you go under a pseudonym online. But again, we had nowhere near the amount of forced interaction, constant interaction that kids these days can have. So like I said, I was very badly bullied at school, but I pretty much knew that as soon as I got home, there would be a respite. That did change when my bullies realized that they could look up our house phone number in the phone book. And so then we started getting dodgy phone calls. And that wasn't pleasant. But if you unplugged the phone, then it didn't really matter. Whereas these days, where our kids get so much of not just their social interaction, but their entertainment from social media, if the bullying then also transfers to social media, they are less safe. Children are very quick to set up group chats, I've noticed. I don't remember where I was, but it was some kind of trip, I think we were doing. And one of my co-teachers said, oh, maybe it's a good idea for you guys to set up a group chat so that you can keep in touch with each other, if any of you get lost. And one of the kids said, oh, we've already done that. So creating a group chat whenever they are in a new group seems to be a bit of an instinct for them, which means that giving out your phone number to people, or at least giving out your phone number to a big group of people, and you might not be entirely comfortable with everybody else who is there, but if you don't join the chat, then you are going to be left out. And maybe we as teachers are encouraging them to create a group chat, which might be encouraging children to give their details to people who are bullying them, and we're unaware of that. It adds that extra social dimension to it. There have been increased family stresses over the past few years. Children seem to be increasingly aware of their family stress, certainly more so than I was as a child. There's more political polarization, and that's becoming more spoken about. It's becoming more aggressive. It's becoming more prevalent. And there is just the general spread of online hate. A lot of people who are kind of against this idea of living your life online cite this as a reason not to do it, because everything online seems to be so negative. There seems to be a lot of hate. Every opinion that is expressed online seems to be a negative one. And if those negative opinions are being expressed at you, if they're being made about you because somebody in your class has taken a disliking to you for no real reason, then that's going to have a long-lasting impact on your feelings of self-worth, on your ability to function even. And again, it's something that is more prevalent in this kind of digital world than it was when we were children. But despite all of this complexity, schools are still expected to be places of safety, to be places of belonging, and to be places of emotional growth. And that tension between the rising challenges and the rising expectations, that's what is at the heart of today's conversation. That's kind of what I want to get to grips with today, because that's what we as teachers are having to balance. But it's also the thing that makes our job nigh on impossible, because there are so many different aspects, so many different facets to this conversation.
In education, we all want recruitment to be fair and inclusive, because the gender pay gap won't disappear without clear, practical steps in how we hire. Recent national research shows schools are already taking meaningful action. 40% of leaders now include pay or progression details in adverts. 35% highlight well-being support, and around 1 in 5 are using anonymised shortlisting to reduce bias. Teaching vacancies, the Department for Education's free official job listing service, makes these steps easier, with clear salary fields, flexible working filters, and an application format that supports blind recruitment. It also removes previous salary questions, so candidates are assessed on their skills and experience rather than their past pay. For your next hire or your next role, go online and search Teaching Vacancies Gov UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
One of the most important things that kind of comes out of the book is that teachers in German schools often feel underprepared to deal with the bullying and the violence that their children are facing. This was kind of summarized quite nicely in a review of the book that I read, which noted that teachers show mangelnde Interventionskompetenzen und größere Fortbildungsbedarf Handlungsbedarfe hinsichtlich des Verständnisses von Gewalt und Mobbing, der Diagnosekompetenzen, der Empathiefähigkeit oder nachhaltiger Interventionsstrategien. So, a lack of intervention competencies, and there are significant training needs in understanding violence and bullying, in their diagnostic skills, in their empathy, and in the understanding of suitable intervention strategies. And I think there's a lot there to unpack, because I know that when I read that, I felt quite affronted, because I feel like as a teacher, particularly as a teacher who was bullied as a child, I feel like I am quite well equipped to deal with it. I feel like I do have um, an understanding of violence and bullying. I feel like I do have empathy. I think I have sustainable intervention strategies. But actually, as I was reflecting on it, I realized that my skill set as a teacher is about supporting the victim of the bullying, supporting the child that is being harassed. And I actually do have a weaker skill set when it comes to intervening and when it comes to dealing with the child who is displaying the bullying behavior. So for me, it was quite interesting to go through that process of being quite affronted by this idea that I, as a teacher, might struggle with dealing with bullying, that I might lack something. I'm actually realizing, yes, I do. And were I to return to a brick and mortar school context, because, I have to acknowledge that in my context, in an online school, bullying between my students is something that basically is impossible to happen because they don't know each other. My students are very rarely together. We mostly deal in a one-to-one context. But yeah, if I were to go back and have a class of 30 students, I would want some more training, I think, on dealing with this, because I can have empathy. I know the strategies for dealing with the feelings of being bullied, but maybe I don't have the correct strategies for dealing with the child who is doing the bullying. So let's kind of unpack all of these different things and figure out where it is that I personally might need some more training, but you might feel you need some more training as well. And remember, this is not an attack, it's not an affront. That feeling of attack that I had at the beginning, that was wrong, because it's important for us to know where, as teachers, we are lacking in skills, because we cannot all be perfect at everything. We don't necessarily all want to be perfect at everything. I'm sure most of us feel that we have one particular skill set that is stronger. Me, I consider myself to be an academic teacher. I know that my academic stream is stronger than my pastoral stream. And so, if I'm going to be the best teacher that I can be, it's important for me to recognize where my areas of improvement are and actually do the work to improve them. So, first of all, let's kind of think about what counts as bullying. Because this is a conversation, again, that we talk about with our children quite a lot, but we may not actually internalize for our own practice. So in the book, lots of German teachers were reporting difficulty in distinguishing between normal conflict, because, and I hate saying this, but there is an amount of interpersonal conflict between children that has to be normalized, that has to be taken as this is just how it is, because of the, let's be honest, ridiculous ways our school systems are set up. If you put 32 people in a room together, you cannot guarantee that they will all get on. You cannot guarantee that they will all like each other. You cannot guarantee that they will all want to work together. And that counts for us as teachers as well. How many times have we been in training and our hearts have sunk when the phrase, "I'm going to put you together with people you don't normally work with," is uttered? And again, it's not necessarily because we don't like those people that we don't normally work with. We just don't know them. They are out of our comfort zone. And that's with us as adults. And as adults, we have the experience, we have the understanding, we've been through the schooling to know how to work with people that we don't necessarily know. We know how to work with people that we don't necessarily like because we know what the consequences are of refusing to do that work, of making our feelings known, let's say. But our children don't know that. They haven't had that schooling, they haven't had those same experiences. So when we then take 32 children who are very emotionally reactive, who have very strong feelings, who have a very strong tribal need, that there is, and we discussed this on the show before, there is demonstrable need in children to be part of a collective, to be part of a belonging. And there may within your class be 3, 4, 5 different collectives, different belongings. And if we haven't given them the tools and the experience to deal like adults with this intertribal disagreement, then they are going to use another phrase that I hate, behave like children. The best way that we can actually reduce this need to normalize interpersonal conflict in school is to reduce our class sizes. Again, you're still not going to make every child in a class like each other, but that's okay because you don't have to like everybody. And that is an important lesson to learn. But the smaller the class, the fewer opportunities there are for widespread bullying, for widespread violence, the more likely we are to minimize those negative impacts. So that's a normal conflict. And, you know, a lot of teachers in the book report be finding it difficult to figure out what is just this normal, there are 34 of you in this room and you're not all going to like each other, and what is actually sustained violence, sustained bullying. How to distinguish a one-off incident, so a child is having a bad day and lashes out at somebody else, and what then is genuine bullying. Our children, as we know, will overextend that word bullying. This is a very common linguistic phenomenon. When you learn a language rule or you learn a new word for the first time, you will quite often use it even in places where it isn't particularly correct. For example, and this is a big one that is very pertinent at the moment, it's the one that it probably comes up the most in conversations that I have with language teachers, is the reflexive pronoun myself, yourself, themselves. Because people are using themselves or yourself all over the place in completely the wrong context. But people are doing it because they think it sounds posh. And because quite often, particularly if you've been through UK schooling, you aren't actually taught when to use a reflexive pronoun, when to use a reflexive pronoun emphatically, and when not to use a reflexive pronoun at all. And so you hear it, you hear other people using it, you hear people who you think are educated, you think are quite posh using it, and you go, oh, okay, so that's how I make myself sound better. And so you use it. And it's the same with this word bullying. Children learn about bullying in school. They learn that bullying is when one person treats another person badly. We tell them that it has to be sustained, otherwise it's not bullying, but they don't really internalize that bit. They just equate bullying equals being treated badly, and so they will apply that to every situation where they are treated badly. And if you've ever taught primary school, you will be incredibly familiar with this overextension of the term. Parents will sometimes do the same. Now, I'm not a parent, so I'm coming at this with that caveat, but I imagine that hearing that your child has been mistreated by another child must be one of the most painful things that can happen to you as a parent, because you are sending your child off to school where they are out of your care, they are out of your line of sight. You are trusting the school to keep them safe. You are trusting the school to keep them secure. And then they come home crying because another child was mean to them. I can see that being quite heartbreaking because you as a parent have no control over that. Again, because we've all been children and we've all had that learning of bullying equals someone being unkind to you, it's then very easy for you as a parent to go into school and say, my child was being bullied. And as a teacher, it's really difficult to have that conversation, because how do you say to a parent, actually, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Your feeling about this is wrong. Your child was called a name. Your child was hurt. Your child had an unpleasant incident, but it was a one-off. And so it's not bullying. Because that feels quite dismissive, I think. If I were to say that as a teacher, I would feel like I was being dismissive. And I think it's because we've got a lot of connotations with this word bullying. And it always, to me, feels like if we say, no, that's not bullying, then we're downplaying it, we're dismissing it. Whereas in fact, regular conflict, one-off incidents, they can be harmful. They can be equally harmful. And I guess the way that we get that across is by having these conversations and saying that, bullying is a negative way that children are treated, but it's not the only negative way that children are treated. There are other things that can happen, and if we have the correct vocabulary for it, I'm always going to advocate for the correct vocabulary. I'm a linguist, but if we have the correct vocabulary for it, then we can deal with it properly. Because I think there should be a difference between how we deal with bullying and how we deal with a one-off incident. I feel like there should be a difference between how we deal with bullying and how we deal with harassment. I think there are all sorts of little nuances within how children treat each other. And if we try and treat them all with the same brush by saying it's either bullying or it's not, then we're doing a disservice to everybody involved in that conversation. When it comes to diagnosing situations accurately, teachers are reporting, quite rightly in my view, that we often only see the tip of the iceberg. And this is something that I think we quite often get besmirched for in ways that we don't deserve. We are expected as the teacher to have, again, particularly in primary, but in secondary as well, you are expected as a teacher to know exactly what the dynamics of all of your classes are at all times. And I think it's very easy for people to forget that what we see is only a small portion of the interactions that those children have. And we see these interactions when the children know that they are being watched by an adult. Bullying is usually hidden from that watchful eye. It's usually very subtle, and it's usually socially complex. I think there is an instinct to want to degrade bullying as being something very blunt and very obvious. I think it's very easy to want to suggest that bullying is an unintelligent thing to do. And it can feel quite uncomfortable to accept the fact that there is thought put into bullying. There is intelligence put into bullying. It's not a gut reaction. It's not somebody having a bad day. That's a one-off incident. And to know that a child is willing and able to put all of that thought into the social manipulation that is behind bullying these days, both on and offline, to make sure that they don't do it where they think they can be seen. That's quite scary because it means we have to deal with the fact that this is something that one child wanted to do, that it was a deliberate action. And it's much easier to deal with bullying if we put it down to a mistake. If we put it down to, oh, that child didn't know what they were doing. But again, if we don't realize that quite often this is coordinated and it can be maliciously intentioned, then we are downplaying what is happening to the victim of the bullying. And we are downplaying whatever is going on in the head of the child who is doing the bullying behavior. So we don't actually solve the problem. But as teachers, we don't see it because bullying is designed to be unseen. And I think that's really important for everybody to remember. Then we have the empathy skills. Teachers do not lack empathy. Let's just be very clear about that. You can't be a teacher and lack empathy, in my opinion. If nothing else, you have to have empathy for the fact that you know something that your children don't, and you want to fix that issue. You want to make sure that they have the same knowledge that you have. That's the whole point of our job. So it isn't that we lack empathy, but maybe actually the issue can be that we have too much of it. Again, that we, as in my situation, you can empathize with the victim of the bullying and then find it difficult to deal with the child who is demonstrating the bullying behavior. I'm using the behavior language here instead of saying the child who is a bully, because I do think it can be, again, reductive and destructive to say the bully, to tar that child with that brush, to give them that name. But that's just how I feel about it. But the other issue that we have, of course, is that the child who is displaying those bullying behaviors, they may not have empathy. They certainly are not displaying empathy for the child that they are bullying. And so where empathy is an issue for teachers in this German study, it's actually about teaching that empathy, about having strategies to help the bully develop empathy for their victim, for the person that they are bullying. And finally, we have got this need for sustainable intervention strategies. We know how to stop an incident in the moment. We know how to intervene. And that's particularly helpful for stopping one-off incidents. We can do that. That's easy. But long-term changes, so shifting group dynamics, shifting group norms, rebuilding relationships, preventing recurrence, teaching children actually you're not going to like everybody, and that's okay. You don't have to like everybody. You just have to be civil, because that's how a society functions. Those are all things that are much harder to teach, particularly if you are a curriculum teacher. If you're a languages teacher like I am, if you teach geography or PE or whatever, and you are trying to get through your content, and you may not feel like you've got time to stop and have a conversation about the dynamics of your classroom. And that itself can be a really difficult line to tread, because if you don't tackle it, then the learning is disrupted, so you're not going to get through your whole curriculum anyway. But it's highly likely that this isn't just an issue in your class. It's highly likely that it's happening with every teacher, that these particular groups who are who are disagreeing with each other, let's say, are in. And so then there needs to be a bigger strategy. There needs to be more joined up thinking between the different teachers within the school to figure out how to tackle those dynamics. And I think that's what's really important to remember on kind of both sides of the fence, for the teachers and for the people outside of teaching, is that none of this is and none of this should be a criticism of the teacher. It's about recognizing that the requirements of our job have changed much faster than the training we're being given. And the requirements of our job in dealing with this increased violence and dealing with this increased bullying actually, if we're very honest, goes beyond what we should be trained to do. I'm a very big advocate of kind of staying in my own lane. I am not a psychologist. I know enough about how the brain works to talk about pedagogy, because I'm a teacher, so I have to understand these things. But I don't understand group dynamics. I don't have training in why a stronger social group feels the need to dominate a social group that they feel to be weaker. That's not my area of expertise. That's not even particularly my area of interest. But there are people out there who do have these expertise and who do have these interests. And they should be the ones who are being brought into school to deal with these things. It all comes back to funding. If we're very, very honest, it comes back to the fact that I, as a linguist, should be allowed to focus on making sure children understand language, because that's the bit that I can do. That's the bit that I really do understand. And there should be somebody else on payroll who understands group dynamics and all that sort of thing, whose job it can be to sort this out. But while teachers are being given everything to do, things are going to go awry and things are going to get missed. And if it's not that the bullying gets missed, then it's going to be that the subject content gets missed because of the amount of time that a subject teacher is having to take out of their curriculum in order to deal with this situation.
In education, we all want recruitment to be fair and inclusive because the gender pay gap won't disappear without clear, practical steps in how we hire. Recent national research shows schools are already taking meaningful action. 40% of leaders now include pay or progression details in adverts. 35% highlight well-being support, and around 1 in 5 are using anonymised shortlisting to reduce bias. Teaching vacancies, the Department for Education's free official job listing service, makes these steps easier with clear salary fields, flexible working filters, and an application format that supports blind recruitment. It also removes previous salary questions so candidates are assessed on their skills and experience rather than their past pay. For your next hire or your next role, go online and search Teaching Vacancies Gov UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
So, oh, no, wrong section. There we go, part 4. Let's have a think then about what this means for us and kind of the conclusions that the book comes to that we can implement within schools. There are about 6 of them that we're just going to chat about over the next few minutes. So number 1 is that bullying is a group phenomenon, not an individual one. We don't live in a 1980s American high school film where there is a bully character and they are the only one who is behaving badly in the school. That's not how it works. I'm not even sure that that's how it worked in the 80s, but I was only just born, so I can't really speak to that. But the book tells us that the research shows that it is very rarely about one, in inverted commas, bad student. Bullying is about group dynamics, it's about status, and it's about social norms. So our intervention strategies and our teaching needs to rely less on the restoration of one um, of one student, and more about looking at the dynamics of the classroom, at the dynamics of the group, and figuring out how to restore that balance. Takeaway number two is that whole school approaches, sorry, work best. So an isolated intervention, a workshop, a poster up in the corridor, all of that sort of thing, the lovely little tick box exercises that say, yes, we have dealt with bullying as part of our PSHE curriculum, they don't change the culture. And bullying and violence is a cultural issue. It's consistency that changes culture. The culture of your school is what your school does. It's not what your school says it does. It's not what your school is decorated like with the posters up on the wall. It's what is actually happening within classrooms, in corridors, within those walls. And so it's that consistent approach to zero tolerance of bullying, let's be honest, that has the most gains. Students need to see adults modeling conflict resolution. Sometimes it's very easy to hide the fact that you don't like another teacher or that you don't agree with another teacher. And it's probably seen as best practice to hide that fact. But actually, what is probably most useful is for children to see you going, I don't agree with what this teacher says, but. And to see you modeling how you deal with being told something, having something said to you, being told to do something that you don't necessarily agree with, but that you're going to do anyway. And again, there are all sorts of very, very easy ways that we can do that. In the weather, a child says to you, "Sir, can I take off my tie?" And you really want to say yes because you know that it's far too hot for them to be wearing their ties, but you have been told that uniform must stay as usual. So you say to the child, "No, I understand that you're hot, but we've been told that uniform must be as normal. And I personally don't agree with that. I would also like to loosen my tie, but this is what we've been told, and so this is what we have to do." And kind of just modeling how you deal with that conflict, how you deal with the fact that you're having to do something that you don't like, shows the children how they should be dealing with it. The fourth takeaway from the book is that empathy can be taught. Empathy is a natural feeling. It's something within the vast majority of us. A lack of empathy does end up being a diagnosable syndrome. It's part of psychopathy and all of that sort of thing. So the vast majority of people do have empathy, and you can expect the vast majority of people to have empathy. And so we need to nurture it. We need circle time to nurture that empathy. You can get children to engage in reflective practice. How did they deal with something? Give them some journaling prompts to think about during tutor time if you've got nothing else planned for them. If you get them to reflect, if you get them to think, then their empathy can be nurtured, it can be restored. Literature is great for this. If you get them to read books which are about empathy, which demonstrate empathy, then you can get them on side. Restorative conversations also go a long way toward building empathy. Now, this came up on LinkedIn earlier this week. There was it was from the Teachers Talk Radio account, I believe. And we were talking about how some children have learnt to game the restorative conversation system. And I completely agree with that. I think that lots of children have learnt to game the system. And that's because we don't actually have restorative practice. I said this on the post. What we do is we play at restoration. We have a conversation with the child, but it's not actually a restorative conversation. It's just a chat that we call restorative, because restorative practice is deeper than what we do. It's deeper than what we have time to do. And I think quite often restorative practice gets a bit of a bad rep because what we're doing doesn't really work. And what we're doing is being called restorative practice when in fact it's not. But actual restorative conversations where children are taught empathy, where children are expected to genuinely reflect on their behavior, they do work. And the reason that they work is because it isn't a one-off. A restorative conversation, as we might use it in behavior management, is a one-off chat at lunchtime, because you don't want to give up more of your lunchtime than you need to have these conversations. But if you are actually engaging in restorative practice in your school, then it has to be more than a one-off conversation, because it's about behavior change rather than behavior management. And there is a really big difference there. Behavior management is about making sure that everybody in your classroom, when they are in your classroom, remains safe. Behavior change is about taking away anything that might make them unsafe, either within their own behavior or the behavior of their peers. And again, I'm not qualified to do that because I'm not a psychologist, I'm a linguist. And I think sometimes that's why, again, we tend to dilute these really excellent pedagogical practices because we're not given the time, we're not given the skills to develop them. And people who do have the skills to develop them are not given the job to do so because there isn't the money for an on-site educational psychologist. Takeaway number 5 from the book is that early intervention matters. The longer bullying behavior continues, the harder it is to stop because it becomes ingrained in that culture of that group of children. They have a culture away from us. We are a pit stop in their day, particularly now where they are on social media so much of the time, where they have each other's phone numbers. It might look like children spend less time together because they don't go out and play like in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 70s, whenever, but they are actually spending more time with their peers than we did as children because they are online with each other, because they are on their social media, because they are sharing memes, because they are on the PlayStation, the Xbox, whatever console they might have, playing together. They are still playing together. It's just in a different space. And they are more accessible to each other because they are all online. When we were at school, if your bully lived 3 towns over, it was likely that the only time you saw them was at school. Whereas now, if your bully is 3 towns over, you can still be in the same Fortnite lobby. Listen to me using the terminology. And so it's much harder to escape now because they have their own culture, they have their own subcultures, they have their own tribes, I guess, to use the term that I used before. And again, we as their teachers, we are one pit stop. We are one class. We are, if you are primary, we are 6.5 hours in their day. Whereas the culture that they are building together is their entire day. It's their entire world quite often. And so the earlier we can intervene with unkindness, the less likely it is to spread its roots. Unkindness and bullying, it's a bit like mold on bread. It gets into, it seeps into it very, very quickly. And the earlier we can get rid of that piece of mold, the better. Please don't eat bread that has had any kind of mold on it, because it seeps in so quickly, it does become dangerous pretty much immediately. If there's ever any mold on bread, throw it out straight away. But with bullying, you can change it. You can remove the mold, you can remove that negative behavior, but it takes time, it takes actual proper intervention. Finally, point number 6, teachers need and we deserve training in this. The review makes it very, very clear. We need the training because we don't all have the skills to deal with it naturally ourselves, but we also deserve the training because it is a big part of our job now, whether we think it should be or not. It is. And it's horrible for us to think that we can't do our jobs properly. And it's horrible for us to think that our students are creating this this toxic culture for themselves, and that there's nothing that we can do to stop it. So we need the training in what we can do in the short amount of time that we have with the children every single day to be able to put a stop with it. And parents need that training too. They need to know what they can do to put a stop to it. The book goes on to suggest a kind of 5, I don't know why I said 6 phase. Oh yes, I do, because I'm reading the wrong section of my script. That's why I said 6 phase. The book goes on to recognize a 6 phase model for schools that schools can develop if they want to adopt their own approach to violence prevention. So we're going to kind of spend a couple of minutes now walking through those 6 phases. The first phase is entry and awareness. So that is to recognize that there is an issue of bullying within your school. How many times have we heard it said, oh, there is no bullying here? How many times have we seen people look the other way so that they can hold that party line? Step number 1 in tackling violence and bullying within our schools is to recognize when it's happening. Phase 2 is stock taking. You actually need to speak to the children, and not just the, in inverted commas, bully and victim, but we need to speak to all of the children. You could do this through surveys, you could do it through interviews, you could do it through pupil voice, you could look through CPOMs, or whatever your instant report collecting software is, and you can do a stock take of the data showing bullying behavior in your school. You can look at it and you can go, right, in our school, in the culture that we have of our school, because culture is what you do, it's not what you say, this is what is happening. These are where the pinch points are. This particular class is where we are seeing the most incidents. And if you actually listen to what the children want to tell you, and you listen to the voices of all children, you are going to see not just the tip of the iceberg, but possibly the bit down to the water surface, because you're going to have a more holistic view of what is actually going on within the dynamics of those classes. Phase 3 then is your goal setting. What do you actually want to do? Once you've taken your data, and you have seen what the issues are, what do you want to resolve? Because let's be honest, a well-meaning but nebulous woolly goal like, oh, we want to stop bullying in our school, is never going to happen. You need to be very concrete about what it is you want to stop, what it is you want to prevent, what it is you want to intervene in, and set that goal. And then when you have achieved that goal, you pick a new one. Because that's how you, in inverted commas, stop bullying in our school. That's how you can say there is no bullying in our school, is if you are constantly looking at the data. And I know it's more work. It is more work. And this is why we need more people, more funding to help to deal with it. You then look at your planning. So you choose what programs you're going to implement in PSHE, in tutor time, in circle time, in whatever, to help to tackle whatever issues there are going on. And it doesn't necessarily need to be explicitly anti-bullying programs. If you are noticing that there is a specific issue where let's say a trans child is being bullied in your school, and you are noticing that there is a transphobic culture developing amongst a particular year group, then that might be the program that you implement. Not an anti-bullying one, but a trans-inclusive one. Similarly, if you have got somebody who is being bullied because of their race, you might want to look at anti-racism programs instead of anti-bullying programs. And again, that can be really uncomfortable because you don't want to believe that particular children in your school can be homophobic, transphobic, racist, whatever. But being in denial about that doesn't help anybody. And again, that's where your data collection, your stock taking comes in, because you can see what the actual issues are outside of this nebulous and often incorrectly used term bullying. You then look at how you implement your plan, you roll it out, you monitor the progress, and you adjust as needed. You don't give your teachers a medium-term plan, say, please, can you teach this, and then assume that everything's going to be okay. You actively keep on top of it to make sure that it is going well, to make sure that it is having the impact that you desire. And maybe you do some more data collection. Maybe you talk to focus groups of children to see whether things are improving or not. Then you go through the evaluation, what worked, what didn't work, what needs to continue. And what I really like about this 6-step model is that it's all about school development. It's not a quick fix. It's not a tick box. It's not one PSHE lesson and suddenly we've solved bullying. It understands that violence, bullying, harassment in schools is an ongoing complex issue that is about child dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, is influenced by stuff that goes on outside of the classroom just as much as stuff that goes on inside of the classroom, not just in terms of what the children are doing, but also in terms of the beliefs that they are exposed to. We seem to have stopped talking about the manosphere at the moment, as if all of that kind of misogynistic element of social media has gone away, but it hasn't. It's still there, still needs to be talked about, could be a cause of bullying in your school. And so we need to keep revisiting what is going on. What are our children seeing? What are they hearing? What is happening in politics? What's happening on the news that they might be aware of that could be impacting what they think? Because they have so many more influences than their teachers. We tend to get blamed for everything. as if just mentioning the fact that LGBTQ people exist is going to make everybody gay. If we had that kind of power, then everybody would speak French, because I would just tell them that French existed and then it would magically happen. And my job would be so easy. So because we don't have that power, because we don't have the kind of influence that people like to pretend that we have, at least in negative ways, we need to keep revisiting things. It can't be a one and done, let's just check the box. But a lot of us don't have institutional power. We can't implement a whole school policy. Hopefully, some of you listening, maybe you are pastoral leads, and maybe you do have that power. And hopefully, I've just given you the 6 steps that need to be repeated in your school, but that you can implement. But I, as a head of department, a head of a languages department, I don't have that power. But there are things that I can do. There are things that we as individual teachers can do on a smaller scale to help. The first is to acknowledge the fact that we are not imagining things, because the landscape has changed. Violence and bullying have increased. This isn't just media spotlighting. This isn't children being snowflakey. It's not any of that. The data, at least from Germany, but let's be honest, from all around the world, is showing us that these things have increased. Remember that you are not underprepared to deal with bullying, because your training has helped you with that. The reading that you've done has helped you with that. The courses that you've been on behavior management have helped you with that. You are under-resourced. You are under-supported. Our job has changed faster than the training has kept up. You can find millions of trainings about AI these days, but hardly anything about how to deal with a culture of bullying in your school, because the training hasn't gotten there yet. You can make a difference. We, as individual teachers, cannot change a whole subculture, a whole child's culture. But we can demonstrate positive practices. We can demonstrate positive behaviors. We can be there for the child who is being bullied. We can be there for the child who is exhibiting the bullying behavior. Just by being us and by being positive role models, we can do something, even if it's small. Whole school culture is everything, because no one teacher can solve bullying alone. It needs to be a united front from the staff. It needs to be part of your staff culture that this is something that you tackle. And finally, you deserve the training, the time, and the support to deal with this in your classroom. I know that that's easier said than done, because it can be quite scary to go to your SLT and demand those things. But if you are noticing that this is an issue in your school, in your class, you deserve that support. You have a right to that support, and you have a right to somebody to help you to find it. We know that that's not always easy, because we are seeing reports of staff bodies going on strike over violence and bullying in schools. But the more we have these conversations, the more frequently we have them, the louder we have them, the more likely we are to get that support and to find ways to solve this problem. So yeah, this hasn't been the cheeriest return to Saturday breakfast, but hopefully you have found some things interesting or useful coming out of what the data from Germany are showing. If you are interested, I really do recommend getting hold of a copy of that book. It is really good. I will be very honest. My copy is in German. I don't know if it's available in English. But if you've got a German teacher in your school, or if you don't, this might be a good time to open up a German department, just saying. You might be able to get them to read it for you, and give you a bit of a more in-depth summary than I've been able to do over the last 90 minutes. But it is a fantastic book. And it just goes to show as well that we do need to be looking at data coming from around the globe, not just out of our own countries, not just out of our own contexts. Because the more we see that other teachers in other countries are having these same issues, the less alone we feel, and the more united we are as a profession to make the world better, which is ultimately what we want to do. So thank you very much for joining in. I hope that I will see you next Saturday for breakfast. Hopefully, we will have chats before then. I can be found all over the internet. I am one of those people that lives online. So I'm just about everywhere. So do come and have a chat if you want to. But if I don't speak to you in between now and next Saturday, do join me for breakfast then, because I, for one, am very much looking forward to it. I hope you will have a great week. Thank you very much and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.